This episode contains graphic and disturbing content, including discussions of suicide. Listener discretion is advised. If you find the material distressing, please seek support from a qualified mental health professional. Hello and welcome to this episode of Crime KE podcast. My name is Ajuma and I am a human rights journalist from Kenya. Now, in this week's episode, I want to tell you the story of a little known case about the death of a young girl from Bomet. Now, from the source materials I used to research this case, I could not determine Daisy Chepng'etich's exact age, but based on my own assessment, I assumed that she was in her mid to late teens. Now, Daisy returned home one afternoon in December of 2017 after disappearing for 2 weeks, and that was the last day that she would be seen alive. This is a story about a family dispute that escalated beyond anything any of them could have imagined. At 11 p.m. on Saturday, 16th December 2017, Colonel Joseph Ngumbi, attached to the DCI officers in Bomet Central, is assigned to a murder case. He immediately heads to one Jackson Kibet Kirui's home, and when he gets there, he finds a crowd of people gathered at the home. Now, in his court testimony, he says that the witnesses he spoke to at the scene told him that Jackson had killed his daughter and gone into hiding. Now, according to the witnesses, Jackson had tied her up with a rope on both hands and used a stick to cane her, which ultimately led to her death. Inside the house, the detective found Daisy's lifeless body on the floor inside her bedroom. The detective said that at this point he could see bruises on both Daisy's hands and another one on her head. From the scene, he recovered the rope, which was supposedly used to tie her up, and the stick believed to have been used to cane her. Now, according to initial interviews by investigators, Jackson was disciplining Daisy for disappearing from home for weeks without permission when the incident happened. Police moved Daisy's body to the Longisa Hospital mortuary, and they began an in-depth investigation into what happened that led to Daisy's death, including actively searching for Jackson, who was a big part of this case. Now, 4 days after her death, on 20th December, an autopsy report conducted on her body revealed that she had died from a head injury caused by blunt force trauma. The pathologist found that Daisy also had what he described as minor injuries to her upper arms and her forearms. He found that her right hand and forehead were swollen, with slight bleeding beneath the swelling on her forehead. He also concluded that Daisy had a concussion on the frontal lobe of her brain, which came from the swelling on the right side of her brain. The cause of death was listed as cardiorespiratory arrest secondary to brain edema after blunt force trauma to the head. Now, Jackson stayed on the run for close to 1 month until 11th of January of 2018, when he came out of hiding and surrendered himself to the Bomet police station. He told the police that he had decided to surrender because he felt at risk of being murdered by mob justice if he kept hiding and ran into it. Jackson was officially arrested and charged with Daisy's murder in January 2018. He took a plea on the 29th of January and he pleaded not guilty to the offense. So the case proceeded to trial. The presiding judge heard from 6 prosecution witnesses and 3 defense witnesses, including Daisy's uncles and brothers who were at the home on the fateful day. Now, according to testimony presented in court, this is what happened leading up to Daisy's death and after. Now, both Jackson and his wife, Daisy's mother that is, testify that Daisy was a, quote, troublesome child. They both told the court that she would disappear from home from time to time without telling anyone. Now, according to Jackson's testimony, she would disappear from school sometimes, and her teachers had also punished her for that behavior, and even on suspicion that she was using drugs. Jackson said that Daisy once beat up her mother after an argument and even threatened to burn down their family house. Now, apart from being troublesome, he also testified that Daisy had a history of sickness. Now, I want you to remember this because it is an important part of the case and judgment later. Now, according to Daisy's brother, Ronald, he testified that he got home on that day and found that Daisy had returned, and their father had gotten the help of someone he identified as Aaron to catch her. Jackson told him to go and call 3 of his brothers, that is Ronald's uncles. He rushed and came back with the 3 uncles, and he said that when they got back, they found Jackson holding Daisy by her arm. He told them that they should help him tie her up on the sofa inside the house so that she would not run. Ronald said that the 4 tried to cancel Daisy by asking her to change her ways, but she was very rude to them in return. He testified that rudeness was what led their father to beat her up. Now, Ronald testified for the defense, and 2 of his uncles testified for the prosecution. And I noticed that this part of their testimonies did not align. Now, according to Ronald's testimony, they all participated in tying up Daisy to the chair. But according to the first uncle, by the time Ronald called him from his place of work and they reached the home, Daisy had already been tied up. The uncle testified that it was at this point that Jackson explained to him that he needed his help in counseling Daisy because he was concerned about her behavior of leaving home without explanation every time. Now, at this point, he could see that Daisy's hands had been injured from being tied up. The second uncle, who testified for the prosecution, said that he learned that Daisy had returned from tip lackers who told him that Jackson wanted to beat her up. Now, on hearing the news, he said that he rushed to Jackson's home, and he also found that Daisy had already been tied up on a chair. He also said that at this point, he could see clear bruises on her hands, which were already swollen. Now, he said that he was actually the one who requested that Daisy be untied, and when she was untied, she immediately went and locked herself in her room. Now, this is another part of the story where some of them start sounding sketchy, because according to Ronald, when Daisy locked herself in her room, the uncles sent him to go and check on her. Ronald told the court that they were worried that Daisy would harm herself, specifically by taking her own life. So Ronald went to the room and ensured that there was nothing there she could use to take her own life. And he said that he even gave her food, which she ate before telling him to cover her. Now, at this point, Ronald said he got concerned because Daisy looked sick. So he went outside and informed their father and uncles that he did not think Daisy was okay. He says that by the time he got back to the room, Daisy had fallen off the bed and she was lying down near the door. Now, he apparently goes back to inform them again about what had happened, and his uncles tell him that Jackson had already left to get a vehicle to take Daisy to the hospital. At this point, the uncles pour cold water on Daisy, but she is unresponsive. By the time Jackson returned with the vehicle, he was told that Daisy had succumbed to her injuries. People started gathering outside the home, and most of them believed that Jackson was responsible for Daisy's death because he had beaten her and injured her. So they were baying for his blood. And that was when Jackson decided to go into hiding. Now, the prosecution in the case argued that the judge should find Jackson guilty of murder with malice aforethought because he chose a cruel way to discipline his child and eventually caused her death. They wanted the court to consider the fact that there were eyewitnesses to the crime and direct evidence and testimony placing Jackson in blame. On the other hand, the defense argued that Daisy's death was caused by falling off the bed and hitting her head. When Jackson testified, he was very adamant that he did not hit Daisy on the head and that when he was caning her, he only hit her on her arms and shoulders. He said that when he left Daisy in her room, she was alive and healthy, and he was just a witness to the death like the rest of them, not a perpetrator. Now, two other defense witnesses, including Ronald, say that the stick that was used to beat Daisy was not even big enough to cause the injuries listed on the postmortem report. Now, the postmortem report also mentioned that the injuries on her head could have been caused by a possible fall. So the defense's case was basically that Daisy died from an accidental fall, and the prosecution argued that it was intentional murder because Jackson was mad from arguing all the time with Daisy because of her disappearances. They argued that the prosecution did not provide evidence, and they did not provide evidence beyond reasonable doubt, and that the beating was more than discipline and even intended to harm Daisy. They argued that the prosecution did not provide enough evidence to prove that. Now, after 6 years of full investigations and a trial, on March 20th of 2023, the High Court in Bomet found Jackson guilty of his daughter's unlawful death and convicted him of manslaughter. The presiding judge said that even though all the defense witnesses said that he only beat her on the arm and shoulders, the evidence told a different story and that he must have hit her on her head and caused the blunt force trauma. Now, remember when I told you that Jackson said that Daisy had a history of sickness? He told the court in his testimony that she was already weak from sickness, which is why she fell from the bed, hit her head, and died. Now, the judge was not buying what Jackson was selling. The judge did not find this credible. He said that if Daisy died from a fall, it was actually body weakness from the assault by Jackson. Now, according to the judge, the prosecution failed to prove that Jackson had malice towards his daughter and intended to kill her. So that was why he was not found guilty of murder, but he was found guilty of manslaughter. Under the Kenyan law, manslaughter can attract a life sentence, but the actual punishment depends on the circumstances of each case and the aggravating or mitigating factors considered by the court. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this episode. You can support this podcast by subscribing wherever you listen, sharing this episode, and following the podcast on Instagram at crime.ke. Don't forget to give the podcast a 5-star rating on Spotify and to return next week for another episode of Crime KE podcast. But until then, stay safe and remember, it is crime with a K.